You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Welcome back to the Cricket Podcast, where we are previewing the 2021 IPL. This is the fourth instalment of our preview series. We've done the Rajasthan Royals, we've done the Chennai Super Kings, we've done Punjab Kings. Today, we're talking about Kolkata Knight Riders. But before we get into that, just a quick reminder that you should like or subscribe to our podcast, wherever you're listening, whatever platform, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, the other weird ones. Hit subscribe. Be a cross-format hero as well. That's what everyone wants to be in cricket, isn't it? Someone who can perform in all different formats. So head across to Google Podcasts, subscribe there. Head across to Apple, subscribe there. Spotify, you get the picture. And finally, head across to our social media pages, Twitter and Instagram, to give us a follow at the Cricket Pod. Max Rowe Brown, the Kolkata Knight Riders. Where do you want to start here, with the cricket, or would you like to tell us a long story about the city of Kolkata?
Well, I think by now you've probably worked out what the plan is. So Kolkata Knight Riders quite obviously represent the city of Kolkata, known as the cultural capital of India. And it is home to some 9,600 millionaires and 4 billionaires. The name Kolkata itself is from one of the three villages that predated the arrival of the British, who took over and built a city there under the running of the East India Company before the British Raj. But the name Kolkata itself, there's actually there are a number of arguments about where what the etymology for that is. So Kolkata is thought to be a derivation of Kaliketro or Kalikestra, which means the field or the area of the goddess Kali. There's another theory that it could be from Kilkilla, which means flat area. Or it could also have its origins in the word Kal, which means canal, followed by Kata, which means dug. So there are options there. And a final theory is that because the area specialised in the production of quicklime, or Koli Chun, and Kata, it was called Kolkata. So there are your options for why it's called Kolkata.
Those are some good options.
The other
can we do a vote on our favourite
options? You can put it on Twitter if you like. The other part of the name, Kolkata Knight Riders, is named after the 1980s action series Knight Rider, which starred David Hasselhoff as the high-tech modern crime fighter Michael Knight, who rode around in a nearly indestructible car called KITT, or KIT. And KKR's own kit is a very stylish purple and gold. KKR are, of course, not the only team to be named after Knight Rider. The CPL boasts the Trinbago Knight Riders, and their kit actually also features a bit of purple and gold, despite being predominantly red. And both teams are owned by the same franchise group, which is partially owned by the aforementioned Bollywood actor Shah Rukh Khan, whose namesake, as we mentioned, was picked up by the Punjab Kings. He is actually named after the famous actor, so it is a bit of a shame that he didn't end up at KKR. But not every story can be that perfect. And the final bit of very exciting news about Knight Rider is that after a number of fairly unsuccessful reboots, a new Knight Rider movie is in the works to be allegedly directed by Aquaman director James Wan. So
time.
That is a lot to look forward to. Knight Rider, the series, has a fairly lackluster 6.9 on IMDb, and that performance is not dissimilar to KKR's exploits last year. Here we are. We've
arrived at the cricket. We've actually we've stepped out of the weird quiz / Age of Empires / Time Conquerors kind of thing that Max has got going on.
And we are at KKR, yes. So last year they finished fifth. They missed out on a spot in the playoffs on net run rate to both RCB and Sunrisers, despite looking quite well placed for much of the tournament. So it was a little disappointing for them. They didn't quite make it. We were excited last year by the prospects of some of their players. They've got quite a few explosive members in their ranks, but last year it seemed as though their gunpowder had been left outside to gather a heavy Sharjah dew, and they never really fired. But the big story, of course, last year was the mid-season captain switch. Dinesh Karthik stepping aside and England captain Owen Morgan taking the reins. I know some people have fairly, strong opinions about Owen Morgan. Dan, how do you rate the decision of having Owen Morgan take over as captain? Do you think that's a good decision? Do you think Owen Morgan is an excellent captain, as many people believe?
So I'm a little bit unconvinced of this. Actually, I am a bit of a Morgan non-believer, and I'm probably a very rare person in that camp, if you like. If you look at his record before he was England captain as captain, I don't think it was remotely in line with his reputation right now. I think that he's an excellent 50 over captain. I don't think there's that much to debate about that. I'm not sure if I see it so much in T20, and the dynamics in the format are very, very different. In ODIs, hitting is proven to be a great strategy. The teams who win the World Cup every tournament pretty much are the team with the highest boundary percentage. So that's absolutely fine. And you can hide mediocre bowlers, well, maybe not in the recent series between England and India, maybe, but generally you can, and but you can't in T20, and that net boundary percentage, you've got to have a good bowling group as well, and that's a bit of a problem. I'm unconvinced, but we shall see. I'm not a massive fan of the England T20 selection strategies, of which I will assume that Morgan has a reasonable part in. So yeah, I think a lot to prove actually going into this IPL.
It'll be interesting,
at least.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see with a full season in charge whether that makes any difference. He is, of course, backed up by coach Brendan McCullum, from whom Owen Morgan seems to have taken much of his inspiration in the change in how England play their white ball cricket, certainly in one days. So that's a good backroom team to have, And Ross, I believe there's also something going on with the England analytics department working with Owen Morgan in this IPL.
So quite like we draft in Dan Weston to kind of give us support in terms of being a strategic consultant and bring the data side to the fun. There is a bit where Nathan Lehman.
There we go.
Nathan
Lemon. We can go with that. when they get things wrong, Nathan Lemon. When things go right,
yeah,
Nathan
Lemon. So he's been drafted in to help with KKR. And I mean, after England's performance in the T20 stuff and using the coded messages between Morgan and Lemon, I think it's one of those things that it could be interesting to see what happens here, and the skill sets that are developed and the things that are trialed will surely be deployed with the England setup.
Does that mean that they're going to be recruiting Chris Jordan and Tom Curran at the next major auction?
Yeah, I do hope so. And Johnny Bairstow is also going to do the catering, the opening of the batting, the opening of the bowling, and the wicket keeping.
The one thing I would say, just on the Great Morgan debate, and this is why I think in the IPL he probably isn't an amazing choice as a captain. I always think with Morgan that strategically, are you aware of what strategy and tactics mean in the game of chess? Anyone?
I watched the Gambit. If that helps.
So there's in chess, there's sort of two ways that you two things you need to keep in your mind when you're planning your moves, as with being a cricket captain. And there's the overall strategy, which, if you like, is the plan. So my plan for this game of chess is I'm going to open this way and I'm going to attack the king side to put pressure on the king to force my opponent to make a mistake. And then there's the tactical side, and that's basically how you exploit opportunities, and particularly how you exploit opportunities that force your opponent to move a certain way. So you put your opponent in check, he has to move to place A, that exposes one of his pieces, and you can take that piece for free. So I think from a strategic point of view, Morgan is quite a good leader. And I mean, over the years he has been involved in the England setup, he has been a key member in changing how England think about white ball cricket, how they prioritise white ball cricket, how they prepare for it, what their overall game plan is. I think on a more granular level, so those tactics, and I'm thinking here that can be who's in your team. That could be, what do I do if one of my bowlers is being hit and I've got these 4 other bowlers to use? Which bowler do I use? I think at that level, he falls down a little bit. I don't think he's a particularly fantastic tactical captain. And, you hear in the UK, for people in the UK, we've been hearing Dinesh Karthik talk about cricket for the last, 2 weeks. And you do sort of think, like, at that tactical level, which has got to be the skill set that you want from your captain in an IPL 14-match franchise league, because the strategy happens elsewhere. You have to think that they've missed a trick a little bit getting rid of Dinesh Karthik. That's just my opinion, and hopefully the chess example broke that down in a way that was understandable, or at least taught you a little bit about chess.
Well, thank you very much, Jack, for the chess anecdote. Obviously, Dinesh Karthik does remain there as vice captain, so he does have that to lean on. But underneath that leadership team, the players themselves, there wasn't much money around to spend at auction for KKR, so the squad looks very similar to last year. They've got some, as I mentioned, blockbuster talent. I'm thinking the likes of Dre Russel, who we like to see smash the ball to all parts and also provide the odd bit of bouncing people out of the game from time to time. How important do you think he is to KKR? And is it often a case of if Dre Russel comes off, KKR come off?
I think that Dre Russell from 2020 is the best T20 batter I've ever seen. But I wonder whether the body has deteriorated just a little bit too much to expect that level of production any longer. If he can go back to that, he's worth about 4 normal players. He was so much better that year than anyone. So I would say he's beyond important, because I think a little bit like some of the other teams we talked about, Chennai Super Kings and Rajasthan Royals, this KKR team probably are going to rely on some individual performers, and they're lucky that Russell, informed Russell, could be one of them. But I don't know if the body's there. What do you think?
Yeah, we will just have to wait and see, don't we? I mean, he bowls fewer and fewer overs every time every IPL that goes by, it seems. But it's just, we will just have to see, won't we? It's the knees, isn't it? Whether the knees can hold up. What they have done this time around is, as it seems, brought in an actual like-for-like replacement. So I mentioned the auction. Probably the main names that they brought in are Shakib, Ross's favourite, Harbhajan Singh, the 42-year-old, and the only slightly less old Ben Cutting. He does seem to be a man in there who could actually just drop in. If Dre Russell can't play, you would bring in Ben Cutting, obviously not even close to the same level, but very experienced and actually helps keep the balance of the side. So there were a few games last year where Dre Russell didn't play, and KKR really had to switch up their lineup, and it's bringing in an extra bowler, moving the batting around, and it all got a bit messy. So that's good from that point of view, from a depth point of view. But on Shakib, Ross, do you think he will actually play, or is he there just as a squad member?
I think Shakib will play. I honestly, I think actually, and Dan will shoot me down on the numbers side of things, but the guy is a champion, right? The guy has won something for KKR, and I think that actually goes quite a long way in kind of IPL cricket. And I think they wouldn't bring him back to that franchise if they're not going to use him. So I'll be surprised if he's not in that starting lineup.
So in that case, who do you drop out of Narayan, Morgan, Russell, or Cummins?
I would drop Narayan. I think Narayan is over the hill now. I think the experiment has kind of been done. People have kind of worked him out a little bit. The confidence in the bowling action you saw from the last IPL wasn't there. I think if there was a player out of that lineup to drop out, I think they're kind of thinking that it will be him.
I think that's a fair argument, yeah.
Yeah, it's like you've read my notes, Ross, because you've segued us on nicely to that elephant in the room, which is Sunil Narayan, and that was very unnecessary, by the way, for those watching on YouTube. Yeah, so I mean, we had questions on Twitter about this, and the question essentially is, what do you do with Sunil Narain? The KKR seem to have moved away from what they previously did of having him in as a sort of pinch hitter, as an opener. They've moved him down the order, which I think is probably sensible, because it just I don't like it as a strategy. I don't think it works, particularly not in the modern game. But that still leaves the question of, does he play or does Shaqib play? Now, I get the argument that you've made there about his bowling has fallen away over the last 4 IPLs. His economy rate has steadily got worse, but it's still not bad, and actually compares quite favourably to Shaqib's historic performance. He did also only score 121 runs last year, and over half of those in one game, but he did that quickly. So like he's averaging like 15 at the moment with the bat, but at a strike rate, at a career strike rate of about 160. So the thing is, like, he's failing, but he's failing fast. So there is perhaps the argument that
he should start a startup.
No, that it's useful that at least if he is not going to go well, that he's not going to eat up loads of balls. Whereas if you compare to Shaqib, he might score more runs, but he can't do it a bit slowly, and there's not necessarily the evidence there that he will actually go big that often. He doesn't average that much more in T20 cricket, certainly in the IPL anyway, than Sunil Narain. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but I do think that Sunil Narain's bowling has definitely fallen away a bit, and for that reason, Shaqib could be the answer.
Can I throw in a wild card here?
You can.
What if Shaqib isn't the answer and Lockie Ferguson is the answer? And then you have Ferguson, Cummins, Russell, and Morgan as your 4 overseas players.
That is a good question as well, because then I suppose and it kind of comes to the second question that we got on Twitter. So that's nice. It's good to get those out of the way nice and early in the middle, which was, do you play Cummins or Ferguson, or can you play both? And if you play both, I think that's the man who has to drop out, right? It's the Sunil Narain or Shakib Al Hassan position. You do have Kuldeep Yadav in the team, who can bowl spin, and of course Varun Chakravarti, who had who played last year and has been around the India squad. So there are options there to provide spin with the homegrown players, and then you do have Cummins and Ferguson, who are useful as lower order hitters. So not necessarily going to be losing out compared to Sunil Narain on the batting front. So there's an option there, and that they've got a lot of pace in this KKR team. That's the thing. Like, both Cummins and Ferguson can hit 150 Ks, and then if you look at the group of young players they've got, there's actually quite a lot of exciting young Indian players in there. So 2 players who played last year and were around that under-19 squad, Kamalesh Nagarkoti and Shivam Mavi. They're both quick. They played a bit last year. They weren't brilliant, but with another year of experience under their belt, they could take a step up. And then also they've got Prasid Krishna, who we saw in the recent ODI series and looks useful. And then on top of that, Shubman Gill, who we know is a really exciting batsman and could be, well, really, really useful for KKR. So, I mean, with those names, Ross, who do you think is likely to be the most exciting or important of the young Indian players for KKR this year?
So I think we need to consider where they're actually playing these games. So I think they're kicking off their kind of challenge in Chennai. And historically in Chennai, CSK have always followed the spinner approach. So I can actually see the value early in the tournament actually being the spinners for them. And I think when you've got people like Cummins, you've got people like Lockie Ferguson, who did impress at the back, sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to kind of warm up, if you will. Whereas I think that them operating in that space with some high-class spinners, you'll see kind of some different results go their way, I think. I'm not convinced by some of the players they actually have in their squad. I think there is a real reliance on kind of their big names. And I think if there's any injuries, they are kind of up a creek without a paddle in a certain aspect of it. So, I'm not really too sure. If there's going to be a team, I really liked Chakravarti last year. I thought it was great to watch, but out of all the rest, it's It's just whether the big names turn up for me.
Harbhajan, you mentioned spin could be important at the start. Are we going to see Harbhajan?
He's definitely an option, right? It'd be interesting if they rocked up and just put 4 out-and-out spinners on the pitch and see what happens.
On the spin front, it's interesting to note that Chakravarti is their only leg spinner, so I'm pretty sure he's going to play. Now, KKR bowled the 3rd highest spin percentage in the comp last year, so they may follow that spin to win mantra, especially if they're starting in Chapok, which is obviously that's the recipe for success. Now, what I noticed as well with their spin group is that they've got Sunil Narayan and Shakib Al Hassan as overseas spinners, all-rounders, if you like. Narayan off spinner, Shakib left arm spin, slow left arm orthodox. Now, they've also got domestic backup for both of those players, so they might look to go horses for courses in some matches and replace overseas with domestic. So Narayan, another off spinner, could be replaced by Harbhajan, and Shakib could be replaced by Power Negi. So there's options to kind of mix up the spin group, if you like, depending on how they structure up their batting and pace bowling group with the overseas as well. So there's some backup options there, and I think that's not a disaster in that respect. I don't ever see a scenario really which merits playing with Narayan and Harbhajan in the same team, because I don't think it's needed to play 2 off spinners basically.
Especially when you have the variety, which they do.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think I like the variety of spin that they have, but it's going to be a question of picking up that balance and working out that right balance, and particularly among the 4 overseas players as well.
And how to pick up Kuldeep Yadav's confidence, which must be lower than 0 right now.
Well, I didn't have him in my kind of possible team, which probably tells you quite a lot. Yeah.
But I think that's a good point with the sort of rotational aspect of where the games are being played this year. Having that option to move around that bowling setup, bring in the overseas players with the pace and bring in some local spinners to mix it up, does give them perhaps an advantage when it comes to playing horses for courses, as you said. The bookies themselves aren't convinced. They're putting KKR about 7-1, which suggests that they might be in a bit of a scrap for a final playoff spot. I mean, they have won it twice, so they have got pedigree, but they haven't made the playoffs for the last 2 seasons. Do you think that's something they will change this year, Jack, or are we looking at another disappointment?
I reckon probably overall a disappointment. But what is interesting is that people in the know, Dan, will tell you that when you're looking to build a franchise team, what you want to do with your overseas players are cover the areas of your squad where the local talent is thinnest. And you look at this team; they've got power hitters where the local talent and where in India the local talent is sort of thinnest in that area. They've got pace bowlers. And in India, the local talent is thinnest in the pace bowling department. And then in terms of batting, like Shubman Gill, Tripathi, they're fine kind of anchor batters. And that fits the broad strategy of using local players to do what lots of local players can't do. And then with the spinners, they've got 3 or 4 spinners, as you guys were just saying. So my head is telling me that this is actually quite a well-constructed side. I just think a few of them are over the hill. And I think a few of their really big overseas players, so a few of the guys that you would rely on to be that consistent power are over the hill as well. And I just can't see them putting it all together. I feel like their year was 2019. I think that's for the 2019 KKR side was the best player of the team that didn't make the playoffs that I've seen in the IPL. It's ludicrous that they didn't manage to put it all together. I mean, I guess they didn't have Cummins and Ferguson back then, but or Morgan to be honest as well. So maybe that's why they didn't put it together. But I don't know. I don't know if anyone else. I mean, I'm thinking. I'm looking at this. I'm thinking that they've invested the resources in the right places. So why are they not going to get the results? I just can't quite get my head around it. But I can't bring myself to say they're a contender. Really,
I agree with you, Jack. So maybe you could even look at them as a bit of a CSK light, if you like, in terms of that age dynamic, and their big name players are well into their 30s. Now, they replaced a 35-year-old captain with a 34-year-old captain. I mean, that's not necessarily future-proof selection and strategy. Now, in terms of their auction activity, I didn't like it a great deal, I must say. So when you go into these mini auctions, the first thing you've got to do is to do gap analysis and work out the areas of your squad which are underperforming and then look to reinforce them. So last year, KKR had the worst batting stability in the tournament. So earlier on, Max mentioned that the Knight Rider film got 6.9 on IMDb. If you stick a 1 in front of it, that's basically their balls per dismissal for the entire competition. About 17. Okay, so yeah, it's in line with that. We draw parallels. Their power play batting was terrible. 22 balls per dismissal, 119 strike rate. They also lack stability in the middle overs, just going up to over 18 balls per dismissal, and that's a real problem. So you would think that from that you would look at several opening batsmen and better batters in general, and they didn't do it.
Yeah.
So
the options were there, right? The options were in the player auction to actually fulfil that.
Honestly, Owen Morgan, Alex Hales, that's it. That's what it comes down to this year.
So
Mike drop from Ross.
When you consider that they could have had Finn Allen instead of Tim Seifert, I think that really does say a lot. They could have had Gerbach.
Banton is a better option than Seifert.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think that is where ultimately KKR will probably struggle this year. But if you do want to follow KKR, some reasons you might do that. As we have painstakingly mentioned for the last 20 minutes, if you like 80s TV, KKR are the team for you. Or if you like rich people or confused etymology of words and names, then that could also be a reason for following the Kolkata Knight Riders. But that, I think, is all we have on them, Jack.
Yeah, great. So we will take another break, and there'll be another preview show out tomorrow if you're on YouTube, or it might all be in one block if you're not. We haven't really decided yet. Find us on Twitter at the Cricket Pod. We'll be tweeting along with most games, and warm yourselves up. Warm up your best questions for our theoretical live stream on the 8th of April. Thanks very much for listening.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
I think it was a disgraceful performance, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again.